Good evening. Noswai everyone. I'm delighted to be asked by Farming Connect to present this webinar on farm diversification post-COVID-19. And as I'm sitting from my office looking across the lovely Pembrokeshire-Carmarthenshire border, it does feel surreal that I'm talking to you about such a sort of a disastrous event which has beset us all. Thank you so much for joining. I'm sure you've all had long days. I hope you'll feel that this session is worthwhile attending, and there will be copies of slides available because I've tried to put in quite a lot of information for you to consider. Okay, so what could the impact of COVID-19 for farm rural diversification in Wales be? It's probably too soon to say, and I would suspect that most of you, if you are farmers living in lovely settings like the picture here and where I'm in Pembrokeshire, we probably feel quite insulated from it. But we all know its global significance and that it has put the UK into its worst recession, into 100 years. So it's significant, mustn't be underestimated, and you individually as farmers and business owners obviously have to deal with that. So what I've been tasked to do, well, I suppose I've been tasked to look into a crystal ball and try and predict, what may or may not happen. My approach is always to be as honest and straightforward as I can be. I'm not here to be liked. As Errol said, I'm here to advise you on what you need to know as opposed to what you want to hear. And this session, the agenda is about me sort of setting the context. It's quite important to understand the context and other factors that are going on which are influencing the agriculture and farming sector. I want to give you my perspective because it's my personal opinion. It's not Welsh Government's opinion. It's not Farming Connect's opinion. It's what I see and think and believe. And then I'm going to talk through what I think expect to happen, what might happen, and what will not happen. And I'm going to try and give that in a sort of a short, medium and longer term. And medium to longer term to me is 2 to 4 years. I then want to identify some post-COVID opportunities and threats for the farming rural sector. And you'll find that there are current themes coming through my presentation. There are a number of things which I will repeat and reiterate, possibly in different stances, but it'll give you an indication as to where I think changes, threats, opportunities are going to be. And the penultimate slide before I take questions will be just a brief summary of highlighting what I think farm businesses need to think about now. And then I'm happy to take questions after that. So let's set the context. Until March 20, probably very few of us knew what a pandemic was. It's now a common word in our vocabulary. And that sort of a, knot of string there basically is a representation of what I think is happening with the farming sector today. And I think the farming sector is going through transformational change, which it hasn't seen since before the Industrial Revolution. And just one color in that tangled knot, I think, is COVID-19. There are many other factors which influence this presentation, and it has to be put in context. In some ways, COVID-19 is accelerating some of the impact. It might mitigate it, or it may not impact it at all. So, we can't talk just about COVID-19 without considering the sort of the wider factors, okay? So, key context things. Information changes daily. We may get some news tomorrow about COVID-19. The R number may increase, which basically means the country or regions of it go back into lockdown. The social distancing rule may reduce from 2 meters to 1 meter. All of those factors can greatly influence, where we are and how we behave and what we do. So this presentation may be out of date tomorrow if something significant happens. So it needs to be put in perspective. It's about the here and now. I genuinely believe that we are in a perfect storm within the agricultural and farming sector. We have Brexit to contend with. We've got climate change. We are now in a recession. We've got the change of single farm payment. We've got population increase, dietary habits, and so on and so forth. In isolation, each of one of those things is significant, but collectively, it does represent transformational change. It's also important to consider that Welsh Government has what's called a foundation economy, which is built on 4 sectors. Those sectors are food, within which farming sits, retail, care, and tourism. Now, if you think about the sectors that are primarily covered to do with COVID-19, it's those 4 sectors in addition to aviation, okay? So longer term, Welsh Government, has a responsibility to ensure that the impact of COVID-19 is minimized as much as possible because it has a huge impact on each of its core foundational sectors. I also think that COVID is polarizing society in terms of how we think about it. And I think there are 3 key areas that you need to consider. One is the urban versus rural divide. I live on the Pembrokeshire-Carmarthenshire border, and to be truthful, I feel guilty saying we've actually had quite a pleasant time over the last 4 months. But I've got many friends and family who live in cities, who have lockdown, they have restrictions, they have concern over health. So the urban-rural divide, I think, is quite a significant factor that you have to consider. You've also got to consider the impact on whether you are young or old, because it's clear that the older you are, the more prone you are to getting COVID-19 and the greater the impact it can have on your health. So there may be a sense amongst youngsters that they are invulnerable to it, but as older folk, it's perhaps a bit more significant, and we won't get through this as quickly as youngsters think we might. There's also a polarized fact about whether you're fit or unfit. And I think it's important to cover these things because if you are dealing with some of those customer groups or businesses, that could influence what you do. Okay, so that's the sort of the context. It's also important I give you, the perspective which influences my opinion. So I'm just 60 and I've been through 4 recessions. I've been a consultant in England and Wales for 30 years. I relocated back to Wales in 1998. And we will get through this without a shadow of a doubt. It's all doom and gloom at the moment. We're very concerned about it, but we will come through this. And for me, I feel we're in a bit of a phony war. We are sort of secluded in a rural setting. I rarely go to towns and cities. I rarely get in my car nowadays, and it's largely idyllic. But that is not representative of what the bulk of our society is going through, and many of them are our customers. It's important to remember there are both winners and losers in times like this. The media and press will focus on the losers because that's what sells paper. That's what they do. But you must bear in mind that there are as many businesses that will prosper and succeed and thrive as those that will fail. Although I'm speaking to you with my Farming Connect hat on tonight, I work on multiple programs in Wales, and we work with all businesses in all sectors throughout Wales. And currently, we have very few business failures. We have a number of businesses that are hurting and are not failing, and they furloughed their staff and are having difficult times, but they have yet to fail. There will be failure the longer this goes out, but equally, I have got some amazing businesses who are doing tremendously innovative things, and they have a very fresh and innovative approach, and they've transformed their business. The picture you see there is of me and some of my staff sitting on the farm gate. And I am a business person. I'm not just an independent consultant. I employ staff. I have to worry about marketing, costs, VAT, all the other bits and pieces that you have. And my thinking has changed radically over the last 4 months. And I'll just give you a few examples of that because it gives you an indication of what you as business people might have to do to adjust. So I typically do 35,000 miles a year in my car in Wales. Last 4 months, I've done 500 miles. That has given me probably an extra 20 hours per week thinking and doing time at my desk, rather than being behind the wheel of my car, losing signal around every corner. Okay, so it's made me much more productive and effective. Similarly, Welsh Government run a lot of these programs, and they've required me and my staff occasionally to see staff where we have to get a wet signature. So we physically have to attend a meeting to get a client to sign a signature, even though we could do it perfectly over the telephone. They have actually changed that. So we now not need to travel 100 miles just to get a wet signature, because technology has enabled that. Also, all of my staff work from home from the end of March. We were equipped with technology to do this. It's been an effortless transition for us, and we've been busier rather than quieter over that period. The office is due to resume sometime in August. I've already committed to each of my staff that for the foreseeable future, could be forever, that they are able to work from home for 2 days per week without having to come into the office, because it's not necessary. It's an important part of our work-life balance. We will have core time, probably 3 days a month when they come in, and that will be it. Okay, so that gives you an indication how COVID-19 has affected us, and I'm on a little farm just north of Whitland. Okay, it's important that we're still in the midst of reflex actions as well. So much is happening at the moment. It's important that you don't make quick, urgent decisions about what you heard today, because sometimes it unpicks what was said before. Okay, so it's important to reflect on some of these things and make strong consideration about what you're going to do. Don't do it on a knee-jerk basis. I hate to say, but I genuinely believe there are going to be other pandemics, possibly in my lifetime, certainly in younger people's lifetimes, but they will be dealt with much better, because this is the first pandemic that the UK has gone through since 1918 and 1919, when we had Spanish flu. And when we had Spanish flu then, approximately 228,000 people lost their lives. And currently within the UK, the death rate is, I think, about 45,000, and within Wales, it's about 1,500. So its significance isn't of that magnitude, but we're not out of it yet. And lastly, I sort of feel that someone's pressed the reset button. I do think it's affected certainly the way I feel about my life, my community, and my staff, what I do and what I tend to value. And I don't know how many of you feel similar sort of things. So that basically sort of sets the perspective. Now, what I want to do is to, give you my views on what I think will happen or is happening, that might happen or will not happen. And I've given it on a short-term, a medium and long-term basis. As I said, these slides will be made available for you. I'll try and leaf through some of the key things, okay? And what I think will happen short-term, 0 to 12 months, a lot of them are self-explanatory. There is a massive increase in UK domestic tourism to the UK, and we are going to have an extended tourism season. So those of you that haven't got any properties open, I would get them open sooner than later. Or if you're planning to get open some soon, I would do it sooner than later. I have a number of clients that are fully booked for the next year, and that's just right at the start of it. There's going to be a huge reduction in overseas travel as well, which we know. There has been an immediate change in corporate culture around how people work and their life at work, and whether they have to attend the office or not. And I think there's been a general interest in health and well-being. And Boris Johnson's paper yesterday basically saying that doctors are now going to prescribe cycling as a step to get back to health is an indicative step of that. I think there's been a huge tipping point in online shopping. I was in meetings in Cardiff on Friday afternoon, and I happened to go into John Lewis for an hour, which is Wales's flagship store. There were more staff in there than there were customers, and it should have been busy. and it wasn't. So I am very fearful about the future of the high street, and I think online shopping has made huge grounds over the last 4 to 5 months, and that's going to continue. I mentioned about hedging bets, about making big decisions now. I think it's important that people sit on those big decisions for the time being before you decide to invest or change or build or change or whatever you want. I think we're probably all much more aware of home cooking and increased interest in sourcing of products. My average spend in the local shops has gone through the roof because I don't go out to a restaurant, I don't buy clothes, I appreciate the finer things in life. That's alerted me to other local producers and suppliers to whom I'm now a loyal customer. And I'm quite happy to pay much more for those products rather than I would have spent with Aldi, Lidl or Tesco, because I'm supporting the local community. It's a great product. I know I'm helping. There is going to be a high level of redundancies, I believe, in retail and hospitality, but I suspect hospitality will bounce back quicker. Tax increases are probably coming. And there is going to be that increased take-up in supporting local. And I mentioned under point 10 that I think different age generations are going to respond differently to COVID-19. In terms of the medium to longer term, there is going to be a steady growth in staycations where people from the UK stay in the UK and they come to Wales. I also think, irrespective of what happens with Brexit, there's going to be an increase in offshore visitors to rural locations because we've got a fantastic landscape and seascape. We've also got a world-class health service. So if people are going to travel and they're going to get ill, they probably want to get ill in a developed country like the UK. I think there's going to be more balanced all year round custom, definitely more home working, less need to attend the office, and I'm sort of a testament of that in terms of my approach of staff. And I think gradually we are going to become a healthier and fitter society with slightly different values. I'm fairly sure there's going to be increased migration and relocation of people and businesses to rural and semi-rural settings from urban settings. I work with a lot of estate agents and land agents, and the amount of inquiries they've received for people looking to sell up, move from the smoke into country settings has increased manifold over the last 3 to 4 months. More shopping done online, increased custom to local businesses. I think that's going to get stronger. And I also think there's going to be an increase in using local and regional supply chains. I think smaller producers are going to collaborate more because they want bigger contracts. And if they collaborate, they can achieve economies of scale and help each other. So I do hope we're going to have a much stronger regional supply chain development. The fact that you're all listening to me online now demonstrates an increase in consumers' use of technology and ICT and online skills. And this is the way it's going to go, going forward. I think the way it's generally going to see increased diversification activity, especially from sheep and beef sectors, because possibly they don't have as many options as others, but that's not directly attributable to COVID-19. This was happening anyway. And I also expect there to be an influx into farming, but probably smaller holders, 20, 30, 40, 50 acres, where they don't require that for their primary income. They're coming late to it because it's a lifelong passion they wanted to pursue. And I expect that to bring a lot more innovation. So that's what I think will happen over the short to medium term. What I think might happen, so the jury's still out on this, I think there will generally be a net growth in tourism, not just a knee-jerk reaction, but I do actually think it's going to increase going forward. And a lot of people who are getting into Airbnb, I've got many farmers who are looking at 28-day camping rule because campsites are full up at the moment. There is going to be greater awareness of and support for local food and drink producers, and that's going to prevail going forward. I don't think that's going to be a flash in the pan. I also think customers are going to be spending more when they come on holiday and either visit Wales on day trips or overnight, because what else can they spend their money on? They've been harvesting their leave. They haven't been able to go on holiday. So they are probably going to be cash rich and time poor. So I expect average spend to increase. And that's not an opportunity for everyone to put prices up. That's an opportunity to capture their attention to ensure they come back. I expect overnight and day trip visits to rural areas will increase significantly to Wales, but also to other parts of the UK, because people will not be able to go abroad, and that's probably going to generate more short break activity. I also expect a new trend in that people who are able to work from home will work away from home on holiday and work remotely. And that's actually quite significant for those who've got hospitality establishments, as people may want to come and stay with you for a week, but they're actually working for 50% of the time, and their business knows that they're working, they just don't happen to be at home. And I do think this trend is going to occur quite a lot, especially for families where the mother or father, one of them works, the other doesn't want to work. They're going to go to night places, someone's going to work, and the others are going to enjoy the area. So I do think that's going to be an emerging trend. I expect there to be increased online sales of food and drink products from farms, especially where people have visited that farmer location and they've tasted their product. They may have seen the livestock in the fields, they've got to know the farmer, they've tasted it, but they have an affinity with that area and that product. So I expect that to continue. I also expect there to be further distress funding from government to kickstart the rural economy. When we've been in recession before, government tends to act to create jobs, help new businesses, stimulate investment, export, and so on and so forth. So the measures that we've had so far, such as CBILS, the furlough scheme, the economic resilience fund, etc., I would expect there to be other measures going forward, but they're likely to be for permanent job creation and real investment. In terms of medium to longer term, what I think will happen, faster pace towards cashless society, and I'm still surprised the amount of places I go to in Wales where you still have to pay by cash. That cash is going to be obsolete, I think, in 4 or 5 years. So it's really important that people do have technology to deal with non-cash. I do think there's going to be an increase in new visitors and return visitors to rural and coastal Wales. And they probably haven't been before because they would have gone on a short break to Mallorca or Malaga or Tenerife or somewhere like that. But now they're not unable to fly. They want to go somewhere nice. So they're going to come to other parts of the UK. And if they have a good time, they're going to come back. And it's really important that original new visitors to Wales do have a good time, because the chances are they will come again and again and refer and recommend the location to other people. Goes without saying, there's probably significantly less overseas travel, much more interest in Great Britain. I do think there's going to be increased take-up of original visitor experiences, you know, on or off-farm activities, and that might be to do with health and well-being or activity. And I think there will be a lot of innovation there. What you've got to bear in mind is that nearly 5 million people have been furloughed at the government's expense. And I've spoken to a number of people who've come back, and a lot of them have said how they want to get out and live and experience different things now. So I think there's a real good opportunity for the activity sector, provided it's a good product. I think there's going to be greater connectivity also with people in cities and big towns and rural areas. I genuinely think they're going to appreciate what we take for granted and how we look after the land and biodiversity and the quality of the food and drink. I think that is actually going to strengthen. And I do think society is going to become healthier, and people will take more exercise, and I think they'll make better dietary choices, and they won't be driven by the commodity price of supermarket foods. I also think and hope there's going to be development of more farm food brands in Wales. I'm surprised how many good, notable farm food brands there are in Wales selling their own meat or cheese or other dairy products. I think there's a huge opportunity there, and especially if you've got visiting tourists who come to your area or been to you, that's a natural way to increase your average spend by customer by selling those products. I also expect planning permission to ease in rural locations. And this is not because of COVID-19. This is because of we tend to follow a lot of the planning laws that happen in England, and it's a lot easier in England than it was. And I expect that to happen in Wales. And for those people that've got redundant buildings or they've got surplus assets they don't know what to do with, then there may be development opportunities either to develop and sell and rent, or to sell them anyway, or create more tourism opportunity. And I also suspect in non-remote areas. And what I mean by that is not up a hill in the middle of Powys, 10 miles away from a pub or a bus stop, but in areas around small country towns, a bit of land, nice premises. I do expect premises values to increase because of greater interest in moving into the area. So that's what I think might happen. In terms of what I think will not happen, so what I don't think will happen in 12 months, we won't lose COVID-19. It's still going to be with us. Overseas holidays will not increase. Staycations will not decrease. There is not going to be a full return to the high street. I am really fearful for what will happen to the high street in major towns. Everyone will not have been vaccinated successfully. I know the government are pursuing something about 70 or 80 projects to look at a vaccination. And I've worked a little bit in the life sciences sector, and obviously it's their top priority to look for a vaccination to get everyone immunized. But it does take place for the efficacy of that vaccination to work. So certainly within the next 12 months, even if they find it tomorrow and we all managed to be inoculated miraculously in the next 3 to 4 months, it's not going to go away because we won't know if it's going to work for many months. I don't think many urban populations will forget lockdown. I think some people will return to normal. I think most others won't. And that's really quite an important factor if you're looking to target them as customers. And I also think the majority of us will not return to normal. I don't know what normal is. None of us do know yet. And I think the world's change forever. And I also suspect that older, less healthier people will not bounce back as quickly as younger, healthier generations. Even though there may be vaccinations there and the social distancing rate will reduce and the R number will be small, older, less fit people are going to be carrying a shadow for COVID-19 for the foreseeable future. You know, they are going to be very concerned about that for a longer time, which possibly influence those that have tourist accommodation. In terms of what I think will not happen in the medium longer term, I do think there's going to be a legacy with COVID and there will be other pandemics going forward. I know that the National Health Service has already set aside certain wards for pandemics going forward. They've equipped for it now. They will expect it to happen again. But I do suspect that we will treat it much differently. And my view of pandemic is like cancer. It will be with us now. If it does happen again, we hope it's going to be treatable and curable and not economically or socially catastrophic, but it could be quite significant. So my view is it's here to stay. I don't think consumers and visitors will forget their rural areas and suppliers if they've had a good experience. I think it's a really good opportunity to treat those original customers well, to encourage them to come back. I also think societal values have changed. They won't return to what they were. I mentioned earlier on about me feeling I've pressed a reset button. That's genuinely how I feel. And I said, this just might be my personal peculiar views rather than anyone else's. I also suspect and hope that the UK will become, more self-sufficient rather than less self-sufficient to supply, feed and support itself. And that's going to be exacerbated by Brexit and exchange rates and other things like that. I also think that regard for our countryside and its value to society will increase for those who don't live in it. I do think there is a silver lining in this particular cloud for us who live and work in rural areas. And I think there will be government support to help business elements of the rural economy, going forward. I think that will continue. I do expect there to be slowed migration from rural locations to urban areas. I think that's actually going to reduce. And there may even be a net gain from metropolitan urban areas back into sort of the country areas. And also I expect there to be more building development and refurbishment in rural areas. So that's what I think, will not happen. In terms of trying to sort of summarize it now, I'm just mindful of time. So what are the key sectoral opportunities? I absolutely think there's going to be increased domestic tourism for quality establishments that provide both catered and self-catered. And by quality, I don't necessarily mean Visit Wales 5-star. Whatever you do, it needs to be good for that particular level and grade. And I think that's a natural growth area for that. I think there's going to be much more farm fresh produce supplied online and via good retail activities. And I think that's across all product areas. I don't just think that's about dairy or meat. I think that could be other areas. There's some very interesting arable activities going on in Wales at the moment to supply the brewing and distilling sectors and also whole food sectors. So that's an interesting trend. I generally think Wales has become less seasonal and it will be open all year round. And if you think you have a seasonal business, you will be a seasonal business. So whatever you do, I think it's quite important to look at reducing the impact of seasonality on your business all year round. I think there's absolutely going to be increased consumer awareness of food provenance, where it's from, what's in it, what's its background, what it's good for you. It's interesting what's been announced recently about obesity. They're going to start putting calorific values on menus. I think that's long overdue. And that's a sign that we're moving towards these sort of themes and key trends. I've mentioned already about becoming a fitter society, wanting more diverse activities. I also think there's streamlined supply chains and improved supplier collaboration at the local and regional level. And I do think there is going to be increased consumer and business migration to sort of rural areas. So that's where I think the opportunities are. And I think there is, you know, a good horizon for that. In terms of doom and gloom and dark clouds coming over, these are the key sectoral threats, which I think you disregard at your peril. You know, you forget about this chapter in our lives and you return to pre-COVID behavior thinking. My personal view is we cannot be the same again. We won't go back to where we were on March the 24th. You know, that model's broken now. We're in new territory and we have to act and think accordingly. I don't think a worldwide vaccine may be found which compromises our economy and erodes societal behavior and global trend. So as a planning assumption, I would expect to be in this situation for 2 to 3 years. Still trading, but there will be restrictions and implications on what you're doing. It's best to plan for the worst and hope for the best. I think it's important also, you know, that you give your customers confidence that you've taken measures to mitigate COVID-19 concerns. And a good example of that is in the Good to Go scheme within the hospitality sector. So for changeovers, people know that the accommodation has had a forensic clean and it's spotless from start to finish and nothing's going to be done to cause any likelihood of transmission of COVID-19 from one guest to another. Similarly, there have been a number of recent outbreaks in food processing units. For those of you that are food processors, I do think you need to make the extra effort or demonstrate that extra effort in ensuring that your product or foodstuffs are not impacted in any way by COVID-19. And also, I think it's really important that you make decisions that reflect your farm's strengths and your family situations and those things that interest you. In Wales, we tend to have a herd instinct that because the other farmer up the road has done that and seems to be doing well, I'm automatically going to do that. That I do not think is the way to go. You know, follow your own path, play to your strengths, your location, and what interests motivates you. And the last slide before I take questions, if there are any from Errol, is, so what can you as a farm business do now? What could you think about now to take stock of this very dynamic situation? One thing is to absolutely scrutinize current consumer and business behavior to see how it's changed. Spot the trends. I've mentioned a number of things several times in my presentation. Trends are emerging, and it's your ability to spot those early trends and to capitalize on them will determine the level of success you may achieve if you diversify. But looking at all that information, you've got to take a balanced view about what you read and hear in the news or from others. Look for the evidence. There is a lot of fake news out. There are so many media channels. No one knows who to believe. So look for the evidence, seek assurance before you act. As mentioned earlier, play to your farm, family, and location strengths. Do what you want to do, feels right for you, and that you realistically can do, okay? And you should be worried about it like that, because if you're worried about it, you'll perform better and probably deliver it well. I think now's a really good time also to experiment or trial new things if you can. Even if it's on a very sort of small hobby type basis, now's the time to trial those things, because they could work, they could take off, especially if that's around using technology, bringing new products to market, collaborating, or doing something different. So I would urge you to experiment and to be innovative now. Which links into point 5, don't afraid to be innovative, be really original, you know, do something that you feel you can deliver, and it may be very unusual, it may be diverse, but who's to say it's not going to succeed? And I think, you know, society and consumers are looking for much more original, innovative stuff to try and do. Absolutely improve your usage of IT, especially digital marketing. Your use of ICT is going to be a critical success factors in longer term in how your business is going to succeed or not. It's going to be more important than reading, writing, and arithmetic. So you have to use ICT for your business benefit. And once you've done all that, before you act, I would suggest you create a coherent and realistic plan before you start to change. So there we are. So a whistle stop tour of what I think will happen, might happen, and will not happen. Thank you for your time and attention. If any of you are still awake and still with us, I would be delighted to take any questions. Thank you. Errol, are you on mute?
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello. Yeah. Oh, thank you very much, Jeremy, for that presentation. We've had a few questions, and I've just go through these. And I'd just like to say, you know, if your question isn't answered tonight, Family Connect will respond later on, because we don't have much time. But I'll have a look. Right, the first question, because of the effect of the coronavirus, will the hospitality business be able to charge a premium on accommodation?
Yes, you can, if demand outstrips supply, which it probably will. If that customer realizes that you're charging a premium, they may not come back again. So I understand the question. My instincts would be you could put your prices up marginally to reflect the fact that you have a smaller season and to make up for lost ground. But I wouldn't charge so much that you get negative press because the standard of your accommodation doesn't correspond to the price charged. I would take a longer term view to get those customers, get them to enjoy their stay and to return and to tell others they've had a fantastic visit.
Yeah, diolch fawr. Another one coming up here. Will the high percentage of urban population be wanting to move to the countryside?
I think they will. And I think that's primarily for two reasons. One, because technology will allow them to work remotely and they can commute to work over the airwaves and still work in their pajamas and do a perfectly feasible job. Secondly, corporate culture will allow it. Businesses are much better now at trusting employees to do a good job, and they don't care where they are, provided it doesn't compromise their work delivery. And I also think town and city prices, especially from England moving into Wales, can command a premium. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is an increase in migration back into sort of the country, particularly with those people who are from Wales originally and they've moved away and they want to go back. So I do expect that to increase.
Yeah. Thank you. This is a similar. Will the properties in rural areas be more expensive in future and be out of reach for the local youngsters? And
Yes,
and should the government step in if this happens?
that's a very good point, and I think it's probably is a true observation. Um, it depends which consumers move into the area. Most people that do move into Wales from cashing in their mortgages from away do not come in at entry level. They tend to buy bigger properties, detached properties with land. If you're talking about starter homes, 1-2 bedroom apartments, smaller homes, I think that potentially could be an issue. And it wouldn't surprise me in certain areas if government did not legislate that there would be a premium to be paid for non-Indigenous people moving into those areas. So, for example, in places like Devon and Cornwall, there are certain areas where they've done such things to discount non-residents or second homeowners moving into the area. But now I think that's a very fair risk.
Yeah. Thank you. Therefore, right. With the prospects of high unemployment, will people be able to afford to come to Wales to spend their money?
There will be high unemployment in certain sectors, but there will also be increased growth in other sectors. So I do anticipate unemployment to increase in the short term. I think it could increase for a year to 18 months. But quickly, as other businesses adapt, they will be creating jobs in other areas. I have one client that has created 20 new jobs in the last 2 months, and they've taken people from other sectors. So I think there is going to be change. And I think in the short term, there will be a number of people who unfortunately will not be able to afford to go on holiday. So I think there will be an element of the population that won't do that. And they would probably be more interested in budget accommodation anyway. So if you do have budget accommodation, then that sector is likely to be hit by that.
And there's a second part to that question as well. If they can afford a holiday, what can we do to make sure that Wales is a chosen destination in future?
Well, marketing, I think Visit Wales, which is the Welsh Tourist Board of old, and an extension of Welsh Government, they actually do a very good job promoting and marketing Wales outside of Wales. We don't see what they do because they tend not to focus on the Indigenous Welsh people. So they will do a good job, and they will do their utmost to promote Wales as a destination. Also, I think, word of mouth, in fact, that saying that Wales is a safe, welcoming place to come and stay, I think that's really important. What we don't want is bad press from people who do, come to the area. So I think there are a number of things that can help at government level, but also for us as people who live in Wales, who run businesses, who may meet and greet visitors. I genuinely think we have a huge responsibility to welcome anyone coming to Wales, because most of us are very fortunate. We haven't had to go through what many of those people have had to go through for the last 4 months.
Yeah, thank you. Questions are still coming in. Can I ask Jeremy for any suggestions on how to go about assessing whether there is scope for more tourism accommodation in your area, given things like Steam reports are based on pre-COVID seasons?
Okay, good question. What I would do is I would look at the major accommodation websites, places like Sykes Cottages, Holiday Cottages, cottages.com, Big Country, any big booking agency, and search for certain types of accommodation in your area. Most of them have dynamic booking systems, and you will see from looking at those how many vacancies there are. and there are very, very few vacancies. Now, what you've got to bear in mind, that is a knee-jerk reaction because people have only just been told they can go away on holiday. You know, self-catering and camping and shared facilities only opened earlier this week, okay? So what you've got to consider is what is the sort of the medium to longer term impact. My instincts are there is going to be a net increase and need for tourism accommodation in Wales. But if you want confidence about if there is demand, go on to any sort of big booking agency, look on Airbnb, other places like that, and try to book and see how few vacancies there are.
Diolch yn fawr. Will the organic sector survive in the coming years?
Yes, I think it will. I think people will improve their understanding of what organic means. I think it is actually often misappropriated. Most consumers actually do believe in natural and healthy and provenance and good animal husbandry and other bits and pieces, and not necessarily the organic soil accreditation status. So yes, I do. But I think it is down to marketing and also differentiating your product. I'm reasonably confident for the food and drink sector if it's a good food and drink product.
No, da iawn, da iawn. Will the banks be on board to lend money to diversify in a recession?
Yes, because they will not want you to fail on their books. Because they're carrying a huge amount of debt. There's a lot of government weight behind banks to support them. What they will require is a feasible business plan to ensure what you're doing is realistic. And that's right. They have a responsibility to lend well and ethically, not to put you into more trouble. So my view is the banks will be supportive of it, but the plans you embark on must be credible and realistic. And also you can demonstrate you've got the competence to deliver it. You don't just need a good idea, you need the characteristics either in yourself or the family or staff to be able to deliver it.
Diolch yn fawr. Do you think Welsh National Parks will relax their stringent planning restrictions on new ventures, e.g. Touring and static caravan sites?
Halfway through the question, Errol, I would have said yes, but as soon as you said touring and static caravan sites, I'm not sure, because the national park stance is that in certain areas of national parks, I mean Brecon, Pembrokeshire and Snowdonia, they feel they are saturated. I do actually think they will moderate planning consents for types of tourism accommodation, but as to whether they go back to more statics or touring, I don't know. What I think might happen in the shorter term is that they may relent on touring seasons, what they will permit or not. I think they may extend them. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually defer licenses so people can trade all year round for a couple of years to deal with pent-up demand and to allow businesses to trade back. What I think will happen, though, is that they will look at more unusual structures. Glamping, for one, it's pretty commonplace, but it's flying at the moment. Also, motor caravans, motor vans, other bits and pieces, there's a lot more of them on the road. So my instincts are, I think there will be a relaxation in rules, but it will be based on that particular location within the national park.
No, thank you. I've got a couple of questions here which are pretty similar, Jeremy, and I'll ask the two at once, if you don't mind. When do you think any possible grant funding will be announced, and what financial help is available to diversify to tourism, for example, camping pots?
Okay, well, within tourism, most grants available come from Visit Wales, which is Pan Wales, and they tend to award grants based on permanent job creation. If you're creating a glamping site, which is primarily self-catering accommodation, there is unlikely to be net job creation. If someone's looking to open a boutique hotel with fine dining, housekeeping, bar, restaurant services, etc., going to create a lot of jobs, then you may be eligible for funding support. Visit Wales's grant funding is currently suspended. It hasn't been cancelled, it's suspended while they take stock as to what's happening with COVID-19. My instincts are there will be further support from Visit Wales for quality tourism establishments, but it's likely to be linked to job creation, innovation, reducing seasonality, and also demonstrates compliance with COVID-19 characteristics. You also sometimes get a unitary authority grant. So in Carmarthenshire, we have a suspended grant scheme at the moment called Carmarthenshire Rural Enterprise Fund, which was about to open in March and then it was suspended. Now, it is a very good grant for people looking to develop buildings and create jobs and economic prosperity. That is suspended at the moment. We don't know when it's going to open. So just because it's not offered by Visit Wales, don't think that your unitary authority may not have monies to fund. So before embarking on any project, I would always contact the physical regeneration department of your unitary authority just to check if any funding might be available. Because if you've commenced the project, you probably invalidate your ability to bid for grant.
Yeah, thank you. Diolch yn fawr. Is milk vending something that could be overdone?
Yes, but I think it's a long way yet before it is overdone. I think it is a very good marketplace. Consumers are buying it, and we've got a number of milk vending machines down by us, and it's locals who are buying it, you know, and it's significantly more expensive than what they can get per litre in the multiples, but they're supporting the local farmer. They, you know, like the provenance of it. I think people like returning to milk bottles and other bits and pieces. So I think saturation point is a long, long way to go yet. And it's, to me, is a growth market. What you do need, though, is good road access and high footfall of cars. If you've got to get people off the beaten track to come to you, then the marketing activity, you need to get those people to deviate from their normal journey is going to be difficult. So location is really important for that, but it's far from overdone yet.
Yeah, iawn. Diolch yn fawr. Next one. What is the future of urban areas? Will they become ghettos?
No, but they will be very different from what we have now. I do think that there will be increased population living right in the middle of cities, on high streets. So for those of you that know Cardiff well, they've got some huge department stores which are soon to close. What else are you going to do with those stores? You could possibly fill them up with lots of mini concessions, but then they need to be found. I suspect very large properties like that will be converted back to accommodation, and it will be a very blended living where you will have some shopping, you will have some office, but you'll also have some living and tourism accommodation. I think in some areas there is a propensity for ghettos, but I don't think it would be as severe for that. But I think there is going to be a rebalancing of how people live their urban and rural lives.
Yeah, there we are, I think, Jeremy. Well, dyna ni, I think we'll bring it to an end. Diolch yn fawr iawn I Jeremy am gyflwyniad cynhwysfawr y maes arallgyfeirio. Dwi'n siŵr I bod ni gyd wedi mwynhau'r cyflwyniad ac wedi cael pyr mawr. A gobeithio bod ni gyd wedi cael rhywbeth I ystyried ac yn mynd I feddwl am gynlluniau gwahanol yn maes arallgyfeirio. Yeah, thank you very much, Jeremy, for a very interesting and informative presentation.
Thank you, Everett, and everyone else. Good night.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank everybody that have come to the joined us and diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Good night.